I'm Jennifer Eggers. I work with leaders and organizations who are going through disruption to improve their capacity to adapt, and I'm the author of international bestseller, Resilience. It's not about bouncing back. How leaders and organizations can build resilience before disruption hits. Today on the show, we're going to talk about how everything you know about resilience won't stand up the next time you get hit, what it takes to come back from car crashes to blood disorder and having your identity go up in flames, and what you can do in the next 5 minutes to be truly resilient in any situation.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, as you probably know, 2020, 2021 has been years that have been and are testing the mettle of leadership and organizations. The word that has personified these times has been resilience. Now, if you've made it through this time of the pandemic, you might be convinced that you have resilience. But do you? Do you have resilience to deal with what's coming next? Because there will be something coming next. Well, stay tuned because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me and what it is that we do at dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your soul, your mind have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and very intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. Astronauts, neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning artists. I mean, it just goes on. These are truly fascinating people. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of the podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go there. And if you don't mind, do us a big favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also listen to us on Google Home or Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. We've all become familiar with this word resilience. The problem with words like innovation, integrity, even resilience is that once they become part of the modern lexicon, they often become severely diluted. The truth is that we live in arguably one of the most disruptive times in modern history. This means that any form of complacency can become a devastating mistake. So we don't just need resilience as an afterthought. We must build resilience in advance. But the question is, can resilience be taught? Well, let's find out together, because that's exactly where we're going. You see, our guest today is Jennifer Eggers. Now, Jennifer Eggers works with leading organizations at some of the most recognizable brands in the world to build resilience and to improve their capability and their capacity to adapt so that they can emerge from disruption more effectively and faster. She is the founder of LeaderShift Insights and the author of international bestseller, Resilience. It's not about bouncing back. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the author of the best-selling book, Resilience is Not About Bouncing Back, Jennifer Rogers!
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't say I've ever quite been introduced like that, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'm jazzed.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. So where we always like to start is this place, which is in this time of influencers and everybody claiming to be an influence, who is somebody that we might not think of, might not recognize, who has been a major influence on you and your leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad I get to answer it. So my dad, I'm sure people don't know who he is, but he was a senior executive for a commercial tree company, actually. And what I really admired about him is that he was able to juggle managing, hundreds of men and these hundreds of crews all over the country. And then he would go from there to a board meeting or to negotiating with a really tough union. And so, back then they had one guy that would go from the board to the union to the men. It was, today that would be 25 different people on a team that did all that. But he took a very employee focused approach. And so even in the face of, some really, really tough things that happened to him, where it wasn't necessarily popular at the leadership table, he stuck up for his men. And he really was known for doing the right thing. And so the interesting thing was that it was profitable because he had the respect of the men when it came time for a really tough negotiation with, say, the Teamsters or IBEW or some of these really tough unions. And he was phenomenally, just really, really good at what he did. He ran the most profitable division for this company in the world. And I grew up, he ran ahead of his time, ran the office and the home. So I grew up, answering the phone, and it was a corporate phone line that came into our house. And so, I was right in the middle of it, even as a kid. And
Wow.
then, the dinner table conversations, which could be, anything from, this crew didn't get enough rain gear, or we had a chainsaw accident, to, I was with the head of the board of directors, or I was in this union negotiation. And some of those were just really fun to hear about because they get a little dramatic sometimes. So he was really the person that I think inspired me to want to really help people in corporate America and make life better.
What was if you could say there was a key lesson that you'd maybe even want to pass on to others from watching him, from being influenced by him, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was if you take care of your people, they will take care of you. And so, when we think about resilience, a lot of building organizational resilience is how well do we equip people to actually give that extra discretionary energy when things get really hard. I mean, if you think about corporate resilience, it has a lot to do with that. Because when we're asking people to give more and more, and they're spread thinner and thinner, and we're asking them to do more and more with less, you're really asking for that extra discretionary energy. And if you take care of your people, they remember that when they need to step up, there's something left in the tank for them to pull from. And I think Dad was a master at getting that out of people, which there's a couple incidents in the book that where I wrote about some of the stories, but just listening to some of the things that he did to really take care of people and take what would have been a very unpopular view at the leadership table, but proved incredibly profitable later. And I don't know that he was ever proven wrong in making some of those decisions.
It's interesting because, in saying what you just said there about your dad, it's clear to me that he was long-sighted. And oftentimes leaders are short-sighted in that this is the outcome today. This is where we need to get to. And your dad had at least a greater understanding of this may be painful today, but the long-term view is better. And as you said, turned up that he had ran the most profitable division because he understood that.
Yeah,
And
he
so
played the
often today,
long
I think we're
game.
short-sighted.
He really played the long game. And I
Yeah,
think that was, and I think the other lesson in there, which I wouldn't really have probably thought about till you asked, but it's a bit about building the relationships and cultivating trust,
right.
which ties exactly back to this whole notion of resilience. It's like, right, if your people trust you as a leader, you can ask for a lot more.
Yeah,
If you're authentic and people really trust you. Um, so yeah.
yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. So, throughout 2020, 2021, we've all faced our own, let's say, subjective challenges that have had many re-examine who they are and what it is they do. There's been a lot of talk about resilience. However, it's a subject that I feel is grossly misunderstood. When you and I talked about this way back in the middle of last year, um, that's why I was looking forward to having this conversation with you on the show. I love that you don't hold back by the very subtitle of the book, which is Resilience. It's not about bouncing back. And
Yeah.
I think that resilience, people think resilience is just about that. It's about bouncing back. So, from your point of view, if it's not about bouncing back, what is resilience?
Yeah, it's funny. We took so much flack for that title, and it was something that I just wasn't giving up. And so I think I feel so strongly about this because the problem with bouncing back, and you're absolutely right. If you ask 10 people what is resilience, 9 of them will say bouncing back, and
Sure.
one will be a smartass. but um, but the thing with resilience is that these disruption hits us so fast that if you are trying to get back to where you were, you're not only going to miss the moment, you're going to miss where you're going. And so it's no longer enough to just go back. We can't. I have a CEO that I love to quote, at Carla Trotman, and she's phenomenal. But one of the things she said to me, one of the first conversations we had about this, she said, by the time I try to go back, everything's changed. There's
Mhm.
no back to bounce to, because that disruption has already taken hold and everything is different. So when we talk about what is resilience really, resilience is about emerging from disruption energized and elevated for having gone through it. So the thing is, you can get good at that. So if you get good at dealing with disruption, you can actually come out of it better than you went in and more equipped for the next one. And so that's, I think, not just, and we talk about, I flip-flop pretty quickly between individual resilience and organizational resilience. The cool thing is we get to do that because the characteristics are identical and it's
Yeah.
built the exact same way. So whether you're looking at building a more resilient company or you're looking at building more resilience yourself, the idea is, how do you get yourself into this pattern where disruption isn't something that's going to throw you so far off that you're completely out of the game. You've got to be able to harness it so that, and it's possible, but you've got to be able to harness it so that it propels you forward faster, more energized, more elevated, and better for having gone through it, stronger.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I talked about many of my listeners here have heard me talk about when I fell and I was constantly trying to get back, but there is no back. That's not how anything works. Nothing
Yeah.
in the universe works backwards. Everything works forwards. And I love what your CEO friend said, which is that by the time you get back, everybody else has moved forward and you're dead in the water because everything's changed anyway. So I love that you're bringing resilience to a different understanding for people, that this is something you can learn, you can practice, and you can come on the other side of this disruptive event, whatever it is, not necessarily a pandemic, but anything, and then be stronger. Because when we spoke last year, we spoke about how the book was actually ahead of its time because you wrote the book before the pandemic, and
Yeah.
everybody's talking about resilience now. people weren't focused on it.
No one was talking about it then.
No, exactly. So what drove you to write about again, somewhat prophetically, but what drove you to write about resilience before it was the new delicious flavored subject?
Yeah, I mean, another great, just kind of a great story. So I had been through a lot, just in my life and, in my business and situation. And that's not to say, I mean, everybody's been through a lot, right?
Sure.
There's hardly anybody that doesn't have some kind of resilient story. But, I was a competitive water skier. I was top 50 in the country. I had a couple car accidents. The first one took me out of training. The next one took me out of competition. I rehabbed, came back, and found out I had a blood disorder. I would never do cardio again. 2009, my business failed. I came back from that. 2015, I had a car fire, dove out of a flaming car. There's all these crazy stories. But at some point, after I started my business, at some point I reached out to 10 people who knew me really well. And I was frankly tired of talking about everything. I taught a lot of things from, professors at Harvard and great leadership thinkers and gurus. And I really knew a lot about leadership, but I wanted to tell the story that only I could tell. And so I reached out to these 10 people and I said, what is that story that only I could tell? And every single person got back to me and they said, you are nothing if not resilient. And I thought, so what is that? And so I went on this, I literally went on this crusade to figure out, and I read every bit of research, every bit of literature I could get on resilience. And there were 4 articles. And this is back in, 2015, that was it. Right. But what I learned, and thank God for this woman, Diane Cotu, who is, and she's an editor at Harvard Business Review, and she wrote one of the articles. And what I learned was that resilience can be taught. And the characteristics of resilience, individual and organizational resilience, are the same. And so that was I read that and I had this huge epiphany that was, not only can I teach it, I can teach it the same for individuals and organizations. So yes. It wasn't enough for me. I didn't really want to just go work with a bunch of people that had been beat up, right? I wanted to really change the world, right? I wanted to change organizations for the better. And I really wanted to make a bigger impact than I ever thought I could one-on-one. And so when I found out we could teach it to organizations, it became this, almost a life's mission. But what I found out was that when I looked back at every one of those situations I had been through, which, I had to kind of go back and analyze, okay, how did I come back? What I discovered is that, there's 2 ways to build resilience. There are many resilient people in the world that went through a tough situation. They got beat up so many times and they got resilience because they got good at it, right? I didn't want to teach it that way. I didn't want to put people through these horrible situations. So I looked back at every situation I went through and I figured out that there were things, very specific and very intentional things that I had done before those things happened that allowed me to come out of them stronger, more effective, faster, and got better at it. And so I started to say, okay, well, what are those things and how do we capture them and create a mechanism to really teach this? And the result was the resilience framework. And so those specific things really got packaged and they got combined, frankly, with a lot of them. There's a lot of emotional intelligence that comes into building resilience as well. And so, having had a lot of that education and then being able to look at the patterns that I had, we packaged this into the resilience framework. And then I said, okay, well, is it going to work? I mean, we had this great model, but so what, right? So we went out and, I first it was a talk, then it became a 2.5-day workshop. It was run with hundreds of companies. We put lots of corporate leadership teams through it. And the feedback we got was just amazing. So I felt like something stuck when I had a CEO, say to me, because we put 12 people through this program, our entire company has more courage. That was like wow, okay, this probably should be a book. And so that was the impetus, for really writing the book that started in we started elements of it in 2015, and then we got really serious about it. And, in 18, and I think Cindy Barlow is my co-author. She and I both very strongly felt like there was the next shoe that was going to fall. And we had this incredible sense of urgency to get this thing out fast because the world needed the message. And I really don't know why that is, but we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew it was going to be something.
Right.
And so we felt very strongly we had to get this out. And, we made choices when we were writing and choosing a publisher and going through all this that we just wanted it out. And it was a labor of love that we felt like for some reason we were working under this incredible sense of urgency. And I couldn't be more grateful to, God, the universe, whatever you believe in, right, for pointing us in that direction. I think we would
Yoda.
both say God, but we feel very strongly that
but the thing I found interesting about it is, like you talked about, there were things that you recognize, or you came to recognize that you'd done in advance. Because let's just sort of, if you don't mind, we're going to roll back a little bit to what you were saying.
Go for it.
So, you talked about you were a top 50 competitive water skier. What kind of things were you competing in? Was these national events? What was this?
Yeah. National events, regional and national events, jump, trick, and slalom. Eventually gave up the jump because I wanted my knees for when I'm, older. But trick and slalom stuck around, and then eventually became slalom. But yeah, I was a state champion.
How long did you do that?
3 states, about 10 years.
Wow.
And I didn't start when I was a kid. So, there was only so far you're going to go as an adult when you don't,
Sure.
you don't get into the sport early enough. But I was also a competitive judge and driver. And, I was as into that sport as you could possibly be at an elite level, which, was fascinating in and of itself, and certainly was my life for a long time.
The reason I'm asking you is because, one of the things that in my work around resilience with my clients over the last 147 years is that resilience, from my point of view, it's not the truth. Part of it comes from knowing who you are beyond your identity.
Absolutely.
And so the reason, that's why I bring it up, is because you're clearly identified at that point of being this highly competitive water skier. You're completely involved in the sport at every possible level, and then you can't do it. And as I, when people talk to me about the fall, and I say, they say, oh, that must have been a turning point in your life. And I'm like, no, actually, it embedded me deeper in the ego, because I was so identified that I thought, oh my God, my life is over because I can't do who I was anymore. And it's the resilience of what does that take beyond the identity. So you had that happened for you. You also had these car crashes. Your car is on fire and you have to jump out of a moving vehicle. And then you've got a blood disorder as well. I mean, again, you were saying thank you to whatever it might be, Yoda, the universe, or wherever. But those moments don't feel like thank you to that entity. It feels like, you bastard, I'm cursed. All right. So can you talk to us a little bit about confronting that? Because I think that a lot of people today, as they're listening in, whatever that would be, are likely facing not just the disruption of an industry, not just the disruption of a global economy or a personal economy, but more disruption of identity. And that identity may extend into, this is our corporate identity, but it's really an extension of, particularly in the case of a lot of my clients who are multi-generational family businesses, that business is an extension of that identity. So just talk to us a little bit about that, because you are the queen of confronting that in spades.
Yeah. No, I mean, what a great, yeah, that's a great direction to go in. So, I think one of the key things when I think about what did I do beforehand, and I can't say like I sat down and said, "Oh, let me do this and prepare," because
No,
something's
no,
going to happen, right? You don't do that.
no.
But what I did, which I now teach people to do, and I now think everyone should do, is get very, very clear on their core beliefs and on what does success mean to you, right? So in my mind, success didn't have a whole lot to do with what I did. It was who I am.
Mhm.
So when you write and I literally went through a program. Now, Cindy was my co-author was the one that taught the program. So this was my first exposure to Cindy. I went through this program where she actually made us write a definition of success that was about the best part was you needed to be able to live your definition of success on a desert island with nobody else around. So that means it's all about who you're being in that moment of success, right? So when you're at your best, how are you being, who are you being, and really who are you? And what are the core beliefs that ground you in that definition of success? So what I learned through all this, right, is that when things get tough, it's really hard to stand up if you have nothing to stand on or you don't know what you're standing on. So for me, I have a really strong faith. I got extremely clear on my belief in God and my faith and what that means. Those are the core beliefs that ground me. So when things happen, I lost everything. I didn't even say this. I lost everything in 2009. When I had nothing, my core beliefs and my faith were all I needed. And the ego of who I am and what does success look like, I could still live that. I could live it without skiing. I could live it without money. I could live it without any of those things that you think this is Jennifer.
Right.
Because that's Jennifer's not defined by that. Now, okay, let's be honest though. the water ski thing was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with.
Sure.
So coming out of the water the day I rehab 2 years, first accident, came back from that, second accident, trying to come back from that, get in the water. I skied about maybe two passes and collapsed. And I had to be pulled out of the boat, had no idea why, had no strength, just literally collapsed. And
You were okay at the beginning?
I was okay at the beginning. I was
And then
totally
suddenly-
fine when I got in the water. And then what happens is, so the blood disorder I have, the oxygen depletes. So normal people exercise, it rejuvenates, you get more oxygen, you feel good, right? With me, oxygen depletes, it doesn't come back. So like a typical hour of cardio for a normal person is energizing. For me, that could be a 3 to 4 week recovery. So just to get the oxygen back in my blood. So that was, having to adjust. I mean, I was a balls to the wall, candle at both ends, leave for work at, 3:00 in the morning because I know I can't ski at night. So I got to get to the lake before dark, train, go back and do it again. I mean, I had this crazy lifestyle.
Sure.
And I had to change absolutely everything about the way I live, the way I think about conserving energy, the way I manage my day. I mean, my whole life changed. So I had to ask for a bit of help when that happened because
Really?
I needed some professional help to figure that out and come to grips with it. But what I didn't have to come to grips with was who I was, because that never was questioned.
That's great. So I appreciate you, because I'm definitely a big believer in that you've got to, and this is again, the self, you talked about the emotional intelligence piece, but the self-knowledge. If you don't, so many people will do that work, even in emotional intelligence, and don't do enough self-knowledge work. They don't dig into that enough. And then they go, well, I did all this emotional intelligence. Yeah, but if you don't do the self-knowledge, then what happens is you have emotional intelligence, but you don't have emotional maturity. And that's a different set altogether that says, oh, well, the wind changed and now I'm not that. I can't play that game anymore. Okay. Does it suck? Yeah, because I kind of really loved that, but okay, next. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, I had to find something else to fill the time, right?
Of
I mean,
course.
there were lots of coping things that I had to come up with. And thanks
Including
to,
being a bluegrass singer. So tell us
that's
a little bit about
exactly
that. I'll take a
right.
minute on
That was
because
what
that's a
filled,
little left field from
that
competitive water skiing because bluegrass seems so sort of, pretty chilled.
but that was what filled the time. I mean,
Yeah.
that is exactly what took, because when you're training for any competitive sport, I mean,
Yep.
it takes all of your extra discretionary energy, all of your time, all of your focus. So, that was the hardest thing, was like, okay, there's all this dead space. What do I do with it? So, I threw myself into music, and that was something that didn't require a tremendous amount of like physical exertion, and so it worked. And I loved it, so it worked real. And it was totally new to me. I moved to Memphis and had no idea what that was, and I got exposed to it and just fell in love with it. So yeah, it was, I think sometimes, and this is, something I learned from the sport, is that when we're trying to make a change, you have to replace what you're doing with something else. It's not
Yes.
enough just to say, oh, stop doing that, right?
No.
We have to find something to replace it with, any bad habit. And that was, a part of it. I mean, I knew enough to know that. So that was part of it for me.
But it's interesting because when I look at all the things, the car crashes, the car on fire, the autoimmune system would be pretty easy to go, someone's got it in for me. Like,
Well,
is somebody trying to take me out? What's going on here?
I'll tell you what, though. I mean, we teach a lot in our resilience workshop. We talk a lot about filters, and knowing what filters are guiding you. Like, we all have filters
Yeah.
based on our experience and
Of course we do.
our background and the way we view the world and all of that, right? Um, what we teach is to be very intentional about what your filters are, and there are a few filters that, whether true or not, is relevant. They're just lenses you put on to view the
Yes.
world. And there are a few that I've chosen that we teach that are incredibly effective. And one is, everybody will say, we'll get in this victim mentality, right? It's easy to say, well, why me?
Yep.
Well, the filter I choose is, why not me? Right?
Mhm.
I'm obviously equipped. Someone thought I was equipped to deal with this. Someone gave me this challenge. So I look at it and say, no, instead of saying, why me? I say, why not me? And then the other filter that we really strongly recommend, and this is something every one of your listeners could do right now, is to think of life as, to adopt the filter that life is hard.
So hold on a sec. Hold on, because I want everybody to grasp that.
Yeah.
So you're asking people to adopt the filter that life is hard.
Yes.
And again, this is why this is one of the reasons I said yes to having you on the show, is because everybody wants to sell you the other filter.
You're
That,
right.
You make the right wishes, you use the law of attraction, rub your crystal on the end of your nose, whatever the hell it is, wear your magic knickers, and suddenly, life is easy. But you're saying, hold on a sec, I'll adopt a filter that says life is hard. Walk us through that, because I can already feel people going,
Yeah, this is the one that you've got the HR people in the front of the room and they already start cringing because they're talking about positive psychology and everything else, right?
exactly.
I don't buy that. Like, I truly don't buy that. And I'll tell you why. So, first of all, the fact that life is hard is a major tenet of every religion in the world.
Yep.
So every major religion, right? Jesus said, in this world, you'll have troubles. It's one of the four noble truths in Buddhism, is that, in this world, you'll have troubles, right? These religious publications, or not public, you know what I'm trying to say, religious texts and scripture and whatnot, they don't say life might be hard, you might have trouble, or someday some people will have trouble, right? They're pretty serious about saying that life is hard. So the other thing is, M. Scott Peck writes about this as well, and I love, I love what he has to say. Is what he says is that the minute you adopt the filter, and he doesn't use these words, but I'm paraphrasing, The minute you use this filter that life is hard, the miracle is that it suddenly ceases to be hard because you expect it to be hard. And when it's not, it's easy. Like it's easier. When you expect things to be hard, you don't go into it with the idea that it's going to be easy and I'm just going to get all these breaks. You go into it with the idea that I'm going to be strong and I'm going to have to, fight for it. I'm going to have to stand up and be my best self. And what Cindy and I have found through, hundreds of these workshops and putting people through this, yes, there are certainly the naysayers. But here's what we know, and we know this also from Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, here's a guy that wrote a book about how he survived the Holocaust. Like, what could be a worse situation to have to go through, right? He survived the Holocaust largely because he didn't expect it to be easy. And what he said to himself was, when I get out of here, I'm going to write about it. And he spent the next, several years in captivity, really thinking about what he was going to say when he got out. And that was this whole notion of finding meaning in this really tough situation. But what he will tell you is that the people that didn't survive, and research on the Holocaust and prisoners of war and all of that supports this, the people that don't survive are the ones that go into it with rose-colored glasses. The ones that have this attitude of everything has to be optimistic. I'm going to smile all the time. And this is nothing against being cheerful, right? No. Optimism has its place, but alone, it isn't going to save you when things get tough. And that's what the research shows time and time and time again.
Yeah, I think it's, people say, would you consider yourself to be an optimist or a pessimist? And my answer is always this: I'm a realistic optimist. I want to be real. I want to look at the positive of it, but I'm going to start with being real. And here's the real. This is going to suck. Like, as a competitive bodybuilder, it's like, this is going to be miserable. I know this is going to be miserable, right? It's going to be miserable right up until after the competition has been on. It's just going to be miserable. You're going to, you're going to enjoy the training, but when you get close to the end, you're going to be miserable. You're going to have no energy. You're going to be eating dry, horrible food that you don't enjoy. And you're just going to be a grouchy bastard for a long time. And then, what's going to be really joyous is obviously if you win, but what's going to be really joyous is probably, if you should eat those things, the pizza afterwards, because you get to stuff some carbs.
It's gonna feel great.
It's brief. I saw a wonderful meme yesterday, and it was a little kid, and the little kid I'm talking about, like little girl who was like 3, and she had her hands up in the, I believe, she had her hands up in that position, and it said, Sunday carbs don't count. Those are the Lord's carbs, and he wants you to be happy.
That's right.
I was like, that's right. I love that. That's
great.
An example of understanding that I think that we're all looking for, I know psychologically because of my psychology studies, but we want things to be easy, but wanting something to be a certain way doesn't make it a certain way.
No.
And this is where I wanted to bring it back to you, Jennifer, which is that, again, this is my opinion, and I'm really interested in what you've discovered, is the reason we lack resilience is because we want to always see things as good. We want things to, we're focused on them being easy. And if that's the focus rather than the filter you've talked about, then it's a setup for getting your ass kicked. It's a setup for feeling beaten down. It's a setup, and all these, here's a medal because you came in 18th in the 18 people in the race, but at least you showed up, honey. Like I see that as almost the anti-resilience. It's like, let's see if we can turn you into a blancmange.
Yeah, I'm going to quote you on the it's a setup for getting your ass kicked. I love that. But here's why. Here's what we know about resilience. So there are three characteristics of resilient people and organizations, and we've talked about a couple of these, but the first one is resilient people and organizations have a firm grasp on reality. They're not optimistic or pessimistic. These are people that have a dogged sense of what is really going on here. And that firm grasp on reality is like, the glass isn't half full or half empty. There's 8 ounces of water in a 16-ounce glass, right? You want more water, we either have it or we don't. It's not a matter of, we're going to sit here and bullshit about, everything being great when it's not. The idea is, what's going to matter is whether you're resilient or not, is how well you really have this firm grasp on reality, that you know what is true right now in the here and now. You can articulate it and get people aligned around what is really true. This optimism is not going to get us there. I think your quote is dead on. Hopefully we won't have to bleep it for your younger listeners, but that I think is the number one, and that's from Diane Coe too, but that is the number one characteristic of resilient people and organizations. The second one is the idea to make meaning, the ability to make meaning in a situation, find meaning in what you're going through, and that's we talked about that. And then the third one is the ability to improvise. So, we're in this situation, and COVID is the perfect example of ability to improvise. I mean, we got hit. I don't know. I think my last flight was like February, 27th of March 27th of last year, whatever it was. And, all of a sudden, like, life flipped on its end. Every speaker was out of business. All flights for the rest of the year were pretty much canceled. Everyone's having to work from home. And the funniest thing, I had an interview with a CEO right before this COVID hit, and he said, he was complaining that his people were trying to get a flight, and this is a company you would recognize, it's a big company. They wanted flexible work arrangements to be able to work at home, and he just slammed his fist on the desk and he said, "My people are never working from home. This will never work. I want them in the office. I'm never going to agree to this." And then I met with him 3 weeks later. And he said, "I'm eating my words." He said, "We've been at this for 3 weeks. We haven't missed a beat." And they're still, now they took a bit of a hit because they sell office supplies, and there's not a lot of offices going on right now. But they found other ways. They did find other revenue sources with some of their other products, and they really are doing well. So, I mean, as well as they could be. But the people working in the office or out of the office did not change a darn thing in how well they're doing. And I think it's the organizations that figured out how to improvise fast, that, the people that are good at the MacGyver thing, right? The ability to just use the available resources they have. I mean, I've talked to people that, okay, I'm working at home, I'm on the couch with a cardboard box in front of me and the laptop on top of the cardboard box, and I've got, a lamp behind it, and they're trying to figure out how to make this work. But they're the ones that are working.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, because here's the thing, and that I did a video last summer when the whole George Floyd thing happened, and the video was called "I'm Afraid." And I said, I started the video by saying, I'm a white guy and I'm really afraid, but I'm not afraid of what you think I'm afraid of. I'm not afraid of Black people. I'm not afraid of riots. I'm not afraid of any of those things. I'm afraid that in our desire to go back to normal, things will get swept under the rug and will become lily-livered again. Will become blancmange again. And I know, because of psychology, human beings don't build resilience while it's good, because we have this crazy ass idea that is always going to be good, right? And if you look back at November of 2019, the economy's doing great and blah blah blah, and we're in a boom, and then you're not, and it's like boom now, and not only that, but like you talked about with this CEO, there were big ships that had to turn on a dime. You had 21 days or you're out of business to turn, and they did, and some of them didn't. But still,
Yeah.
some of the ones that did, and this is what's interesting to me, Jennifer, is that some of those that did are still waiting for things to go back to normal.
Yes,
I
that
don't
is
want to, and
fascinating.
some of those, I have to deal with them just like you do. And I'm like, I'm just bend over because I'm about to kick you in the ass with my pointy shoes because normal's done. It's different.
Yeah.
And so resilience isn't built in the good times. Resilience is catalyzed in the tough times. But what you're saying is these are the pieces to build it when you're not under all the
Yeah.
stress. And so my question is, I'm wondering, genuinely wondering, how many people are signing up for your courses, for your trainings, for your resilience work when everybody's quote back to normal and they've all been vaccinated and nobody's wearing masks and they're back at work and we're in another bull market and they're like, oh yeah, we don't need resilience. We got resilience. We got through the pandemic. Yeah, that's my
Well,
concern.
yeah, I think it's a legitimate concern. And, I think what we espouse with the title of the book, and when we wrote the book, we were certainly thinking these are the things that we need to do to intentionally prepare for
Yep.
disruption. Disruption's pretty inevitable. I mean, if you think about the notion of adaptive leadership or, any number of these sort of, guru leadership thinkers that come out, Ron Heifetz or others that talk about the pace of change, it's not going back. Like, it's not going to get slower. We're not going to suddenly slow down in 2022. So, the idea is that this level of disruption, whether it's COVID or something else, whether it's, a market disruptor or whatever, it's going to keep going. Now, okay, probably if knowing what I know now, would I have written the subtitle of the book is, how leaders and organizations can build resilience before disruption hits. We've helped an awful lot of clients build the plane while they're flying it.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
don't know that you have to wait for the calm time to do that. But I will say that I think there's a recognition now that, we're not going back to a time when we don't need resilience. It is hard to build it so I think there's a difference between resilience and coping.
Yes.
Right. So what I find today is that many of our clients really don't need resilience. They need to just get through this. They need to cope. And so there are a totally different set of tools and skills and things that we do when we're in survival mode than when we're really trying to build resilience. And that's totally okay, completely acceptable, and frankly necessary. There's very different coaching that I would give someone that's in a crisis versus somebody that is intentionally trying to build resilience. So, but that said, I think there are certainly things that teams can think about, whether you're in a crisis or not. I mean, assuming you can just carve out some time to kind of come up to 50,000 feet and really think about some of these things. I think there's some things that both individuals and teams can do, to really intentionally build their resilience, whether they're in the middle of it or not, as long as it's not such a crisis that you can't, sometimes we really need coping. But, I think about things like, we're getting a lot of calls right now for like, well, what do I do? My team's kind of, they're working from home. They're not really that connected. We've had a lot of conversations over the last year of how do you keep these informal relationships going? We've written about that. We've got blogs out there about that. But right now, if you do nothing else, it really pays to pull the team together and have a conversation with them about how resilient have we been over the last year? What are some of the things that we learned? What did we have to stop doing that we never want to do, that we don't ever want to pick up again? What are things that we started doing that we should make part of our new normal, if you will? And really figure out, what worked, what didn't work, what are some of the gaps, what are some things that need to change, but just really checking in and re-engaging the team around, hey, it matters what you think. You're part of something, even though you were home, you're still a part of something. And what do we want to make this something? I think that re-engagement conversation, if you do nothing else, that's critical. And then the second piece for a team, I think, is really working with that team to build a common definition of success. So who are that, and when I say like who is the team, who is that team when they're really being their best? So how are they working together? What are people outside the team saying about them? What are they saying about what it's like to work with them? What are they really doing when they're operating as the successful team, right? What are they known for? What do they pride themselves on? How are they holding themselves accountable? And what are they delivering that no one else in the organization is doing, right? If they left, what wouldn't happen? But and we have all kinds of, tools and there's processes for this. In the book has a lot of that in there. We've kind of got the rest. We've built a lot of this over time, but much of it is in the book. But, those definitions of success are important. And what we find is that companies have, values and principles and visions and missions, and they've got all this stuff. Now is the time to do the Snicker test. And what I like to do is like put all that stuff out on the table and decide what makes you snicker. If your employees are snickering when you say you have the value of integrity, you better find out why.
Exactly.
Because you can't be authentic if people are snickering at your core values or your mission or your whatever. Now's the time to clarify what are the real values? Not the espoused ones, not the ones you wish you had, but what is really going on and who do we really want to be? I think, those two conversations will skyrocket your team's resilience. Now, obviously, we've got the framework. It's got sections of the framework. I would love for you to build the framework with your team. I mean, go through the exercises. But honestly, if you want to short circuit it, like those are two things that you just can't miss.
Yeah, I mean, I've often cited Enron, who had all their values on the wall, and like, yeah, well, we all remember Enron, but not for the good stuff.
I worked for Arthur Andersen, so yes, I do remember Enron.
Right. So, and I've often said that, you got to take your values off the wall and put them in your hands and you put them on your feet. So if you're not walking it, if you're not talking it, if you're not doing it, it's not worth anything. And, one of the things why I want to recommend that people pick up the book and reach out to you is because here's the thing. And this is, again, we're back in psychology here, but we all like to think that, well, we've dealt with the big one, right?
That's
we all
true.
felt that in about 2011. We went, 2008, 2009, that was terrible, but we're coming out of it now. It's 2011, the recession's over. And look, now here is 2019, and we're in this massive boom and blah, blah, blah. And then COVID comes. There's another one coming. There's another something coming.
True.
You don't have to believe me. All you have to do is pay a little bit of attention. So let me give you an example. Economically, what's the fastest growing economy in the world? You think it's America? It's not, right? Look at what's happening in China. Look at what's happening in India. Look at what's happening in Africa, right? These economies are growing at exponential rates. Look at the technology. Look at how you're about to become completely thrown by technology. Look at Blockbuster versus Netflix. Look at Amazon versus the anchor store in the mall. Look at the mall that is now being torn down and turned into condos. It's coming. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It just, we thought about this big thing that arrived. It was called the Industrial Revolution, and everything changed. But the Industrial Revolution was a creeping thing that changed everything over time. And it's the same with the information age and the computer age and the AI age and all those things that are all coming. And now we've got multiples of them. And then you might have another pandemic, and you might have a banking system. And now you've got blockchain, and you've got all these other things that are happening. So I really encourage you to recognize that, as Jennifer's subtitle is, it's not about bouncing back. resilience is something that you need to build in the good and in the bad times. And I really recommend that you go out and grab this book. Jennifer, before we finish up, and we're close to the very end here, I always like to ask two things. I know you've actually given us many, but the first one is I want you to share one thing that our viewer, our listener can go away, do practically, preferably next 5 minutes, but certainly the next 24 hours, maybe with themselves or with their team. And the other thing, of course, we'll get to, and I'll make sure it's posted, but we want to know how people can reach out to you, find out your book and all the resources you have.
Sure. I mean, right off the bat, I think adopting the filter that life is hard is huge. Individually, I think, really thinking about your definition of success and who you're being when you're at your absolute best. The steps and the exercises to do that are in the book to make it a little bit easier for you. But, those are sort of probably some of the strongest things that you can do right off the bat to build your own resilience. And then, the team, I think it's just what I talked about a little bit ago. Just it's really having a conversation with them about, how resilient they've been and how has this year been for them. And, what do we want to keep and what do we need to expend going forward, just to re-engage them around the reality that we're in and what needs to happen now. And then, the other one is, it's kind of same thing for the team, is really thinking about that definition of success or core values or whichever, you feel like is the biggest gap. Those are huge places to start with, both individually and as a team.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, and you probably know this, but Jeff Bezos went out and had a conversation with his board and with his executives. And he said, we're going out of business. And they're all like, what? This massively successful organization. And he said, not today, but we are going out of business. And our job is to keep staving it off another day. And that's the understanding. So he comes at it from,
I
life
love
is
that.
hard.
That's such
He's
a great
coming at
example.
it from, it's
right.
over. So what are we going to do to make sure that we go out gloriously? And you can like or hate Bezos, but there's some brilliance in the man. And that's part of it, is we're going out of business. And I love that as a mentality, because it's not, well, let's buy a smoke machine and blow smoke up your skirt and tell you everything's going to be marvelous forever, because that's the path of Blockbuster, and nobody wants to be a Blockbuster. Jennifer, this has been a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much. Please share with our audience where they can find out more about you, about the book, about all your wonderful resources.
Sure. Our website, the website is www.leadershift.insights.com. So LeaderShift, SHIFT. The word insights is INSIGHTS.com. You can connect with me on there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere social media exists. I think we're not on Instagram, but other than that, feel free to, connect with me or with the company LeaderShift Insights. And we would certainly love to entertain any conversations. I could talk about this all day. So if somebody would like to strategize around, how you can build resilience for you or your team, or, you'd like to entertain it as a company, we certainly are more than happy to just even have a brainstorming session with you to figure out some next steps. So for sure. And then the book is also available on Amazon or on the website. And it is under Resilience Book under leadershiftinsights.com.
Fabulous. Well, again, thank you for being with us. Thank you for all that you've shared. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can go check out those URLs. We will definitely make sure all the links are posted in the show notes. And remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders, and you can chat about this episode that you've been listening to, or any of our past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or a leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what might happen if you adopted the filter that life is hard, not to make it tough on yourself, but to make you resilient. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.